Welcome back to an AI Journal LinkedIn Live. Very excited to bring this session to you today with an awesome gentleman called Joe Barry, who's joining us from Analog Devices. So I'll introduce you to Joe in just a second, but just want to remind people that we've recently come back from South by Southwest, where we've had an amazing time, met some fantastic people from all sorts of industries, all sorts of verticals, and there was a very heavy focus on VR and AR. So make sure for anyone joining us, wherever you are in the world at the moment, whether it's your morning, lunchtime, evening, make sure you stay tuned with all the updates we are publishing around that and the guests that we have coming up on this LinkedIn Live, similar to Joe, the fantastic Joe Barry, who can look at the world of 5G. And I'm really excited for this because we were supporting partners for MWC Barcelona. And obviously that is the flagship conference for topics to do with 5G and to do with the world of telecommunications. And I feel like we're going to touch on some topics around Open RAN today and the kind of role that Analog Devices is playing in this industry. And also to take some time from Joe to learn from him and the experiences in this industry. But before we jump into this world and jump into the topics that we can learn from today, I just want to remind you to add your questions if you're joining us. If we can't answer them on the show because we're very aware we're limited on time, we'll try to get them answered afterwards. And any kind of resources we can share towards what we're discussing, we will do afterwards as well. But Joe, I want to welcome you to the show and hand over to you to maybe just give a bit of a background to who you are, what your experience is, and what's led you to where you currently are today, sir.
Hi, Tom. Well, first, Tom's thanks to you and the AI Journal for this opportunity. I think it's a really exciting topic. I mean, 5G and the pace of innovation is truly remarkable. So I think we'll have a great discussion on that today. In terms of myself, I'm Joe Barry. I live in Ireland. I've been working for Analog Devices now for the last 27 years in the semiconductor market space across a number of, spent a large part of my career in the consumer space. And for the last decade, I've been working in the kind of 3G, 4G, 5G communication infrastructure space within Analog Devices. I currently lead up a business unit within ADI that's focused exclusively on building and developing technology and products and solutions for communication infrastructure networks.
Yeah, very nice. Maybe to people that aren't, because we've got a wide sphere of people that follow our content and get engaged with us and look at what we're doing. So anything from cybersecurity through to smart cities, through to 5G and IoT and the classic AI and all that kind of world. But maybe for people who might not be familiar with Analog Devices, Joe, maybe just give us a flavor for what you're doing, or abbreviated as what the ADI is doing, and how you and the team kind of see the world shaping up today and what you're doing to bring that solution and those helps to the world of this, as you said, innovation and this massive change at the moment.
Yeah. So first, Analog Devices is a technology company in the semiconductor market space. We're focused on creating products and solutions that kind of start at the level of sensing, measuring, and interpreting, and then how you connect those, those products that touch the physical world really to the digital world. Yeah. The products and solutions that we develop, they span across many markets, including industrial market, automotive, healthcare, consumer, aerospace, and communication industries. The company's been around for more than 50 years. We have about 125,000 customers in terms of our demand for our products. And, in terms of our R&D scale and effectiveness, we've over 10,000 engineers focused on R&D. In terms of getting more specific about what Analog Devices is doing in the communication space, ADI has been a leading provider of the radio semiconductor solutions for infrastructure. And for those that maybe are not familiar, it's those boxes that we see on the masts. Those are the radio boxes that typically send on the base stations that you see driving on driving down the freeway or wherever. It's the semiconductor technology within those boxes that my team is primarily focused on. And ADI has a long lineage, long history in terms of, really in terms of our contributions to, going back to the early days of 2G, 3G, 4G, and more recently 5G. We have a very strong market position there because of, maybe some of the unique kind of innovation that we put into the technology around developing the radio solutions.
Yeah, that's awesome to see what you do, because sometimes when people that are outside this industry, to me, my friends or people that I know, the word semiconductor and what it actually means and how it helps, it does go over people's heads, and it's such a core integral part. And it's amazing to hear you helping so many customers and so many people and so many partner networks and all the knock-on value that has, Joe. But to play a bit closer to where we focus and where my passion is and where my focus is, what role, and you touched on it there, what role does AI play in this area within the radio units, and what you're involved in, what your team's working on, the innovations you're working on? Do you see it as a big player? Is it something that needs to be considered? And how are you and your team, or how is ADI looking at that world?
I think if you take the umbrella of AI and and how AI is being taught about today in networks, obviously our focus is at the edge of the network, in terms of radio access network and the radio. But certainly, we're seeing that machine learning is playing it's a very important tool in terms of improving the overall efficiency of the radio. And one of the big challenges in 5G network is energy consumption and efficiency, and ultimately sustainability of the network. Because as the networks continue to proliferate, there's a huge motivation to try and reduce the energy footprint of the network, while you're still kind of exponentially trying to deliver more data. You're still trying to reduce overall power consumption. So when you look at the radios, the power amplifier is really that's the unit that drives the antenna, that drives the RF signal, that consumes the vast majority of the power. And we're really focused on machine learning in terms of how we can impact on the power consumption and ultimately the efficiency of the power amplifier. In terms of how we use machine learning, we use it in a variety of ways to reduce power. So first, we start with what's called digital pre-distortion, which are kind of algorithms that are required to linearize a power amplifier. Because to get efficiency out of a power amplifier, you need to drive it into saturation, hardened saturation, but then you need to correct for the nonlinearity of that. So with machine learning, we can analyze and capture, signatures of the output and tune the resources in the algorithm engine to deliver the optimal performance, and at the same time reduce the power consumption that's required, both in terms of linearizing the amplifier, but also get the efficiency we can get out of the amplifier. We've also started to embed what we call neural nets in our DPD systems, which model kind of the long-term behavior of the power amplifier. This allows the digital pre-distortion system, for example, to be more, to more effectively linearize some of these new GaN or gallium nitride power amplifiers that are being used more and more now in 5G radios. And when you look at 5G radio in terms of the spectrum and the amount of spectrum, it's constantly expanding, both in terms of the RF range, but also the bandwidth that's occupied within the range. So helping to reduce the power efficiency, improve overall transmission performance, and overall energy and spectral efficiency. I think we're seeing that our efforts to deploy machine learning at the edge is certainly having a significant impact.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's that's an application I've come across, but not into that so much detail, Joe. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because you don't think the combinations, as you were saying, with neural networks being combined with machine learning, taking it to the edge. Edge is becoming very popular within the manufacturing scene at the moment. Looking at it from how to connect those dots and the power efficiencies. It's another way why I love to hear about it, because it's another pro, it's another benefit, and it's another one of those ways that one of the underlying critical things to build in, and sometimes gets missed. So if you can, Joe, where does that tie in? Because with 5G, so we see 5G making big strides, and I mean, now I check my phone. When I was in Austin, when I was in London, I get 5G to my phone, and people see it as, well, 5G is just this. I get quicker internet connection. I can check my Instagram feed quicker. I can get my emails faster. But it's so much more than that, because we know it's, and I'm sure you do as well, from the applications it's going to have towards smart cities. And as you were touching on, the connectivity points from a much more bigger applications. Bring us to that, where you see it, what's making news in your industry, and what should we be paying attention to, or what you recommend we should be paying attention to. That'd be really helpful, Joe.
So Tom, as you said, I mean, 5G obviously, at the fundamental level represents kind of a generational upgrade in the networks themselves,
Yeah.
with added new features, improved energy efficiency, and, obviously, this fatter pipe or more capacity. We all want faster downloads. We all want to download more. So it's certainly going a long way. And when you look at global wireless demand, which is really an indicator of, the challenge, that's really only in commercial network. And, we see the layering in now of industrial networks coming as well. But if you just look at commercial networks, that's the demand is expected to grow by 6x over the next 5 years, essentially. So, in order to deliver that amount of capacity, that requires, more RF spectrum, new technologies that can kind of really utilize that spectrum. And kind of an example of, where ADI, we've increased, if you look at the capacity that we've done in terms of some of the products we put under what we call our Radioverse, or software-defined radio SoCs, they've been able to, really focus on the challenge around 5G in terms of, increasing spectrum and at the same time delivering that throughput, but also trying to focus on reducing power and cost by a factor of 16 over the last 4 years alone. While, some of us may not see, 5G is proliferated in our market yet, I mean, it's pretty much on track from my perspective. I think, go back to the early days in 2019, Korea, China, very aggressive in their rollouts. I think, this year now we've seen the US really begin kind of a more widespread rollout. Yeah. I think the European geographies are just beginning now, and I think we'll start to see them ramp up soon. Markets like India are coming online in 2023. But I think from my perspective, from 5G, I mean, the real hot topic in terms of, just going back a couple of weeks to Mobile World Congress, which was great to be back. And, it was great being back after 2 years absence, was really to see the amount of progress the industry has made in those 2 years in terms of 5G, and how that's really evolved into this Open RAN initiative, and what the industry is trying to do there with, ultimately the virtualization of the network and the disaggregation of how these networks are built. I think operators are looking to, this concern, I guess they have, is they would, if we need to have this incredible cycle of innovation that will open up the features and applications that we want across commercial and private networks, we need a very vibrant ecosystem. I think Open RAN, the push and the support behind Open RAN really is that stimulus to try and create a more diverse and more vibrant ecosystem, because I think through more players in the ecosystem, we will see, much greater pace, I believe, in innovation.
Yeah, really love that. And maybe just help me out as well, Joe, because with MWC, what went ahead, there were some great announcements and some brilliant people and a great network for this kind of industry. But you mentioned Open RAN. So I was just quickly double checking with what I've seen about Open RAN and obviously what the benefits are and how it can help. But kind of, if you can give our audience, because I'm sure there'll be people in this in audience that might not fully understand it. So what is Open RAN, and why, as you mentioned, is there a big push, or is there not a big push, but a focus? It's definitely coming on people's eyesight. What's the whole deal with that area, please?
Okay, so if you look at the traditional way networks were built, so if you're a major operator, you would go to maybe a small handful of vendors that could provide, the hardware and the software that would be required to build your network. So you would typically, if you were an operator in the US, you may give certain regions to one supplier and certain region to another supplier. But you were very much limited to maybe 2, maximum 3 suppliers. Their architecture, although it's 5G, it's very much locked in. It's proprietary from end to end. So, everything that comes from them. But with an Open RAN, what the industry has done is first, it's disaggregated how you actually can build the network. So you have a radio unit, you have a digital unit, a central unit, and then you have core. Now, what that disaggregation means is that you can technically have different vendors developing a radio unit or a central unit or a DU unit, but it also opens up the interface between all of these and opens up the software that's required for all of these to interop. So the goal there really is to enable, a more diverse set of suppliers and partners that can develop an Open RAN network. If you look to the motivation behind, sorry, the spider.
Yeah, take time.
If you look to the motivation behind, ORAN itself, I think it's clear that it's really been driven by operators that have been looking for more flexibility in their networks and a higher pace of innovation. As the network demands continue to increase, operators are, they're looking at, for more ideas on optimizing the system and providing more services, more opportunity to monetize their critical assets. Opening up that network brings more ideas, more companies that can, drive key performance indicators and, features that can drive, the returns they're looking for on their investment. I think operators recognize the importance of having a healthy ecosystem of suppliers is the best way to get that kind of level of innovation that they're looking for. And as I said earlier, I think, the industry has evolved from where we had a handful of suppliers to now really only a small few. And I guess from an operator's perspective, that can raise concerns around capacity and market stability. They're looking at an increased number of capable vendors that would require, opening up the network and opening up the supply chains. So I think those are the kind of, from my perspective, I think that's why there's a lot of support from Open RAN, because it's built on the foundation that it will enable, a much more vibrant ecosystem, which in turn will continue to, keep pace with this. If you look at the ultimate goal of ubiquitous connectivity, 5G kind of underpins that, but there's a lot of runway on 5G as it evolves in terms of its capability to really bring through ubiquitous connectivity. Not only in, we all kind of think about our handsets and the kind of commercial network, and that's continuing to evolve. But also, I think, one of the things, became very evident from Mobile World Congress was just the industry is really recognizing now that these private or enterprise networks, are significant opportunities to really bring 5G technology into bear on some big challenges in those industries. So I think, you start to see now the expansion of applications, not only in commercial but industrial, and what needs to underpin that is a vibrant ecosystem, and hence ORAN, I think.
I love it. It's a very exciting area. I'm all for it because I'm all for bringing in new players, new markets, and you get better ideas, you get better areas. And would that, I don't know, would that have an effect on, or would it have considerations for security and obviously bringing new vendors in and bringing the areas of transfer? And forgive me if I'm speaking basic, but I'm just thinking what those, you've touched on the commercial aspects as well. Would that play
there has been several critics of Open RAN in terms of its security, and I think early on in terms of the standardization and the work in the early phases, that was probably true. But I think the industry has kind of united itself in its determination that our Open RAN networks will actually be more secure than the existing networks today. So if anything, I think the end result is we're going to end up with higher levels of security in the networks going forward.
Yeah, I love that answer, Joe, because that's why I'm such a big fan of open source, because although you might open more challenges, you open a lot more learnings. So you can spot something a lot quicker, because if you're very closed, you can essentially, if you're like a team and the team's the same people, you think the same way, you're not going to spot something that someone else might spot. By being that kind of diverse audience, I think you put it really well, that you're going to get new ideas, and if those threats do come about, you're going to get new solutions that come about, and as a result become more secure, become more resilient, and become more safe and better. Not only that, but better solutions as well to help people. So I think that's a great way of looking at it. So I'd love to know, obviously we touched on the challenges and where they kind of lay, But if we look at it and we take the step forward to 5G, and I've started to hear around 6G coming in. So like there's been some, call them clickbait if you want, articles and announcements coming around what 6G is going to bring, whether that's 2025 or 2027 or 2030, however long that takes. So I think we're only getting the ball rolling with 5G now. What can that help to give our viewers a bit of an understanding? What can that bring in terms of innovation? What can that bring in terms of end user benefit? What can that bring in terms of end business benefit? So if a business, whatever industry it's in, say they're in education or say they're in manufacturing or whatever it might be, healthcare, what can this technology enable them to do? If you've got any kind of pointers or specific industry generic examples, Joe.
Yeah. So I think we'll start with I think 5G brings, a couple of things at the basic level. First is ultra reliable network. Second is very low latency, or what they call ultra low latency, which is essential to certain application. And obviously the other obvious one is, higher capacity data throughput on the network. So I guess your question is, what does that open up for us? I guess at the human level, that brings, the expert or the technician or the tutor or the surgeon into the room, or in fact any room, because they can advise, they can teach, repair, operate from anywhere in a practical sense. At the manufacturing or industrial level, it means that equipment can be more mobile, flexible, reconfigurable, and automated in a more efficient way. Right. And obviously, when we look at kind of geopolitically, what's this trend around self-sufficiency and shortage of labor, and a lot of transformation is required in industry, and I think 5G can help with some of that transformation and how production is done. In terms of at the kind of city or community level, I guess you can connect it to things like utilities, transportation, public safety, public services that can be proactive in maintenance and operation on those. We can be more responsive to when problems arise.
Yeah.
So I think you can see it touching on a lot of different areas, and obviously then at the kind of at the smartphone levels, it means that instead of waiting that 5 or 10 minutes to download a video, we can download it in 20-30 seconds, or maybe in some cases even less. Yeah. So and the one area which I didn't touch on, but obviously as we see the networks evolve, and maybe you don't want to get into too much of it, but it's really kind of like metaverse, and what is metaverse, and how does 5G underpin that? But obviously I think one of the things I was seeing a lot on the technology discussion around, again, Mobile World Congress, was around VR and AR. And how those technologies can really kind of help. But when you look at something like virtual reality, you can see the need here is tremendous low latency and a very fat pipe. So the underpinning technology is coming. There obviously are significant challenges around VR and AR ultimately, but I think this technology really helps to kind of underpin the vision and the goals there. As it evolves.
Yeah, I love it, because it's the way I look at 5G is I can get information on demand. It's what I always think. I think it's a lot quicker, it's a lot more accessible, and it's to me it's a big driver of whatever your digital transformation initiative is. I mean, it allows you to be much more on the go and still be able to have data at your fingertips, essentially, if you want to look at it that way. And God knows what 6G will bring, but with 5G, I think it's when I look at it, and obviously with a company I'm involved with in the healthcare sector, I mean, the benefits there are just huge, because you can have, if your network goes down or something, you haven't got to rely, and I could be slightly uneducated in this area, but you haven't got to rely on, traditional models. You can have something almost on demand, and it can act as a backup, and you can have, whether it's videos you need on demand, or whether you need something from someone who's not on the same network, and they can, it's just all these ways, especially with smart cities, of having interconnectivity. And if you're looking at IoT devices, so cars can self-drive, I think it's going to be the next level of infrastructure. I think I really see it as a big driver to allow connectivity. I think people look at it and think, oh, it just means I can watch my Instagram video on the go. I was like, no, it's so much more. Like it's
Yes.
you don't even understand, like, and I don't understand the full extent. That's no criticism, but it's just
I firmly believe, Tom, there's even things that we just can't imagine today that will start to emerge in terms of applications and use cases, and whether it's 2 or 5 years time. But it's kind of like the transformation is coming. I think we can all relate to kind of going back to the introduction of smartphones, but I really do believe that there's an equivalent level of transformation in terms of the technology that will enable that kind of significant breakthrough in how we utilize this kind of these networks.
Yeah. And do you think there's, quickly to touch back on our point, I'd love to know, do you think there's going to be, we might have slightly touched on it, but do you think there are any challenges, Joe, to adoption and to get people on this? Because there's a lot with, say, RPA or other technologies that are used. VR has a lot of challenges to adoption. It's great technology. And I think I'm a big believer in VR and AR. And if you watch any videos, I scream and shout about how it's going to be the future of education. It's going to be the future of healthcare. It's going to be the future of travel. It's going to be the future of buying a house, whatever it might be. Do you see any of those, or do you see any of them coming up? Is there anything that you've had flagged that is a challenge for companies, whatever industry or individuals, adopting this?
Well, I think personally speaking, I think VR will happen, more rapidly than AR. And obviously the challenges here. One part of the challenge is just the technology to deliver the kind of data that you need to experience it. But the other part of the solution is the human interface to make that interface. And the technology is really evolving rapidly, I would say, in that space. Whether it's glasses or goggles or other types of human interface devices that make it as real as it needs to be. I think there's just tremendous industry investment there. And I think it's only a matter of time before that becomes more widespread. That's my own view.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I'm a big believer in, well, look at glasses. A lot of that's going to be driven by probably 5G and by these technologies.
Yeah. And then one example is, if you don't have ultra low latency, then, you need to fool the eye. You have to trick the eye into making it kind of believe it's real. Yeah. So, that part of the 5G technology is kind of is foundational, because if you can't get that latency, then you won't have the experience.
Yeah. Can mess everything up. One small thing can mess up a massive cog. So it's interesting point. And Katie as well. Thank you, Katie, for joining in and saying great discussion. This has been brilliant so far. And we have a few more things. So if anyone does have any questions for Joe in this session, or you want to reach out to him afterwards, please do. I encourage you to, or to the team, to the wider team at Analog Devices. So I'd love to know, what will be the early indicators then in the ecosystem that would show a successful O-RAN adoption? So we were just looking at 5G, what would be a successful adoption there? But when we look at O-RAN or Open RAN, what are some of the indicators that show this is going to be successful, this is going to be impactful, and this is going to drive results, Joe?
Okay. So, when we look at how far the industry has come in terms of Open RAN today, I think I could point to a couple of examples, and I will, in terms of early success in what we call a greenfield network. Yeah. And a greenfield network is where you have no existing network. So you're just going in and you're installing a greenfield. And, if you look to companies like Rakuten, who's a major operator in Japan, they went in and they built a complete network, greenfield network, new operator in the region, very successfully rolled that out with Open RAN. You can see similar in the US with Dish. They're very actively now in the process of rolling out their network this year to be a full Open RAN. Then you start to move into, the existing operators, which we would classify their networks as brownfield networks. And a great example there in Europe would be Vodafone. And, Vodafone have, they're introducing their first open network sites within their existing network. So that makes it a brownfield. And that will be accomplished this year. There are other levels of indicators in terms of the robustness of, I think, the ecosystem that we would monitor. When you look within the O-RAN Alliance itself and that industry consortium, We can see where the detailed standards and requirements are being developed. Made a lot of progress there, and it's a very diverse alliance, which I think is making those standards, very robust. That's obviously an ongoing effort, and it will continue. The other areas you could point to is TIP, or what's called the Telecom Infra Project. That's been making great strides in terms of its efforts to create a marketplace for vendor meetings and customers to define the requirements and solutions. So, obviously with any kind of new and emerging market, it will take a while for new entrants to gain a foothold. Initially the products that we're seeing now are more at the entry level models, which is kind of a classic way to enter. But I think with, next couple of generations, we'll see these improve significantly, and they will ultimately be more sophisticated and advanced solutions than what we see today. And I think, my own sense is that, there's so much significant momentum behind this, all up and down the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is quite diverse. When you look at it from the level of operator down, system integrator, you get into standards, you get into hardware vendors, software vendors, you get into radio design houses or equipment kind of suppliers, and then you get into semiconductor. So if you look up and down and across that ecosystem, I think there's a lot of determination there, and ultimately investment, I think, that underpins the progress so far. And I'm confident that will continue to evolve successfully in the future.
Yeah, I love it.
Not easy to disrupt something, but I think when there's such widespread kind of involvement and commitment to it, I feel confident in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a really good way of looking at it as well, of thinking all that these different models play, right, within making it a success, and depending on the future of what O-RAN looks like and what this area looks like. And maybe, if possible, because and tell me if I'm looking at this the wrong way, Joe, but if I look at something like RPA, right, I know that if you go out and buy licenses with whoever it is, UiPath or Blue Prism or whoever else, Automation Anywhere, and I will get to the point of looking at, if you buy these licenses, there's about an 8 times cost against what the software that you're using. So is there, as you were touching on there with the vendors, is there something that a company or a customer looking to incorporate into their business? Is there areas you'd say that they need to think about, or is there something where, as you mentioned, with the different vendors that are coming in, and if this is even the right kind of question, Joe, but where would you think that people just need to consider their strategy when looking at what role 5G and O-RAN is going to play, if that's a good way to put it?
Yeah, good. I guess it comes down to, specifics. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
You could say, often the critics might say there's a lot of hype around private network, right? And that's the example. But once you pass the hype cycle, I think you start to really get into looking at, what are the real transformation challenges that the, industrial manufacturing, for example, is trying to achieve. How does the existing technology underpin that kind of vision or goal? And then I think you start to see that they have challenges, and this is where, this 5G technology can really help them to solve that challenge. So I think it's when you get into the specifics of each of these markets, you really have to be clear that 5G is actually bringing value in order for it to be ultimately successful. Because you could argue, well, why can't I use Wi-Fi? Yes, you can use Wi-Fi, but does Wi-Fi solve my does it solve my latency problem? Does it solve my security problem? Does it? All of these things start to can I go from inside to outside on my network? I can't do that in Wi-Fi. There's all of these technologies have their place. I think is really how we should think about it.
Yeah, I love that. And to think about it of exactly what do you want to do, like the inside, outside network, all those kind of key questions that open it up, because I know once you're onto big floors and big areas and big operations, it's probably a fine line between using Wi-Fi and using 5G and using these areas. And what's your take then on as a final question? We've got a question from the audience, which is brilliant. So hopefully we can take a few minutes to answer that, Joe. But I'd love to know, what's your take on the future of O-RAN? So we were touching on it there, of where it's going and what's it doing and why this ecosystem is going to be such a big enabler. And I'm 100% backing what you're saying. And I think the exact same. And it looked like a lot of people at MWC were having this kind of visionary movement, which I think is brilliant. What do you think if we were to catch up in, I don't know, you can time it as you want, 6 months, 5 years, what does the future look like to you, Joe?
Great question, Tom. I guess, for O-RAN to be ultimately successful, I think if we were back here in 3-4 years' time,
yeah,
you would look at the penetration of the technology in the networks themselves. And there's a variety of different reports out there. Some speculate that by 2027, 50% or more of networks might be O-RAN enabled. But I think ultimately, for me, success will be, obviously we've got the greenfield installments, which are kind of the more easy lift. Then you start to get into the brownfield, which is not only do you have to support 5G, but you also need to support legacy 3G and 4G. And so that adds a little bit of complication. But I think the industry is already making steady progress there. And, just looking in Europe as an example, Vodafone obviously have really been at the forefront. But then, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, others are really putting a lot of weight behind this as well. And I think once you see their commitment evolve to actual network deployments in the next couple of years, I think you'll start to see this technology becoming much more widespread.
Yeah, that's awesome to think. And I think it was
and obviously that's in the commercial side, and then in the private network side, I think it's probably going to even be deployed in a much faster cycle than, say, the traditional network.
And I think that's a great way of looking at it. I always think, if you remember, Joe, when the outage happened, was it to Facebook or now Meta, and when Instagram and Facebook went down, everyone lost their minds. And you think about how much impact that must have had on businesses, driving ad revenue and driving sales and traffic and all those other things that you don't, you might look at it as a user and think, oh, I can't check the latest update on a certain announcement or a certain page or a certain whoever it might be. But to businesses, that probably cost them a fair bit of money. And you think the same thing with the companies you're mentioning and with that whole industry with the communications. If my phone goes down, I'm going to be in trouble because I need access to my emails, or at least I think I do to a degree. And it is that kind of reliability and that innovation and that kind of constant.
Yeah, it's almost like our third arm. What I mean, if you forgot your phone, you're kind of like, you're kind of
freak out.
Anxiety is ratcheted up significantly.
Yeah, you jump to thinking, did I leave it at that restaurant or did I leave it at home? Or how am I gonna call into that meeting? So it's and that these companies keep us safe from that. And I think these new innovations keep us safe. And I think it was Deutsche Telekom that came up, or they took the investment in the people that apparently built Google Maps. So you kind of see that the innovations and the areas that these companies go into to give us a better end user experience and a better commercial experience, of course. But I always love it because it is something that we use on a daily basis, like a phone, but sometimes gets missed. So I think that's a real great roundup, Joe, of looking at what we can expect for the future. I'm sure that people joining us have learned a lot from it as well. So I really appreciate that. We do have a question from the audience, if you're okay to answer it, Joe.
Sure.
I'll bring it up. Katie, thank you very much, Katie, for the question. Great friend of mine. So how do you think the industry will manage inequality and access to the new tech? So, for example, will we still see many folks using no JavaScript when accessing websites due to bandwidth restrictions in some places? And I guess as a second follow-on question, is the gap to accessing info increasing and going to continue to increase with 5G, Joe?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And it's a question I feel personally, and I think at ADI, we kind of feel passionate about this in terms of what we classically call the digital divide, and what can we do in terms of our efforts and the industry effort to kind of close that digital divide, because, it is real, it is substantive. Yeah. And the danger is that, certain societies and certain areas will fall further and further behind, impacting from, early education onwards. Certainly, one of the things that we can do, and I think this is where Open RAN again has a part to play, is looking at the affordability of the technology.
Yeah.
How can we reduce and enable that affordability in terms of the network? It starts with the network.
Yeah.
And obviously the other areas then are around, for affordability of, the consumption device, be it a handset, be it a computer or whatever. But certainly our focus is, and, we work with companies like Camium and other companies that are really focused on building out, networks in kind of disadvantaged regions and communities. I think the other area that hopefully we're very active in is in space communication. There's a lot happening in LEO space communication. And I think that can also help to kind of reach disadvantaged communities. And it's gaining such scale, I think that'll make it more affordable. So, we're working with a lot of different companies in that space. I think the industry is focused on that. So, look, it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but I think there's significant strides being made by the industry really to focus on that digital divide. And, at a company level, we're very much focused on what we can do within our sphere of influence, and what we're doing in terms of some of the challenges around the costs, because cost is obviously one of the biggest barriers in terms of connectivity and access to connectivity.
Yeah, love that answer, and that really shows what the amazing work you and the team at Analog Devices at ADI are doing. And I always go back to the classic saying that is, we overestimate what we can do in a year and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And we're always constantly in this rush to fix tomorrow without actually properly looking ahead or seeing what the areas are. So great question and great answer, Joe. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Katie. Cool. So, Joe, to finish off, we're really grateful for your time and the time you spent today with the audience. And to anyone that's watching this recording, please put a question in the show notes for Joe or the wider team to reach out to and get answered. And this will be live on LinkedIn for the entirety of the page. Keep staying up. But Joe, I really want to say thank you for joining us. And is there anywhere people can find out more about you, more around Analog Devices? Anything that you're doing at the moment in terms of initiatives or education? Now's your chance to let us know, please.
Absolutely. So you can search me, find me on LinkedIn. For sure, you can get some of my history background and from Analog Devices. I think just go to our webpage. I think it's a very extensive overview there of what the company's doing in the different areas and different technologies. Amazing. So Tom and the AI team, I want to thank you for the opportunity. It's a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, really enjoyed it today. And to everyone watching, thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world. Let us know what you'd like to see more of, who you'd like us to bring on as our next guest. And really appreciate the time that Joe's given you today and given us to learn around the world of 5G and connectivity. And hopefully next time, Joe, when we're at MWC, I'll be able to see you in person. And who knows, do one of these interviews in person, which would be a lot of fun, and see what innovations and see what predictions we get right for this area. That's going to be a very exciting one, and I really do appreciate you taking the time today, Joe. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.